Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Pete's Garage. This episode we're going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to give you a lesson on how to check parking brakes. Now what I'm talking about in particular is those of you out there that have a manual transmission car, or even a lot of you out there with an automatic transmission that have the mechanical style parking brake that you lift up usually around the center console. Now this car right here is a 2012 Hyundai Veloster. What I'm experiencing with this car is that when you pull the parking brake does have tension, it does pull, and it does tighten and lock, but the car continues to be able to roll if it's on a steep incline, meaning that we are not getting a full bite when we pull the parking brake. It is not completely locking both of the rear wheels. So with that being said, a lot of these issues can come down to the mechanics of the parking brake. So on most setups, nowadays Caliper is actually on, the caliper is what squeezes the brake pads. Most of the days now our parking brakes, some of which on the newer models are now electric, they actually have a motor that twists out and pushes the pads together and clamps onto the rotor so that the car can't move. If you have hill start assist or any of those special features that use the brakes, a lot of those vehicles are going to have that. But on most of the vehicles that have the mechanical style lever where you pull it, what you're doing is you're pulling a lever that is pulling a cable, and the cable is actually rotating a mechanism on the actual caliper that is twisting the caliper piston out. It's actually like if you thread a bolt in tight and it stops and it's pushing against something. It's the same setup as these parking brakes. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring you under the car and I'm going to show you how the parking brakes work, and I'm going to show you what to look for if you're running into an issue where your parking brake won't tighten up. A lot of people have this misconception that if the parking brake isn't working correctly, stretched cable, that's all you hear is, oh, you need new parking brake cables. That's not always the case, and I'm going to demonstrate why in a minute here. Okay guys, so I'm going to stand on the back side here and I am going to show you how the parking brake works with this caliper, okay? Now, as you can see, we'll start off with the cable, okay? The cable comes from up in the car, and the cable comes under, and the cable gets bracketed before the caliper so that the cable itself can't move, but the cable on the inside, meaning the actual cable, not the cable housing, can move. Now I can wiggle the cable's got a little bit of slack, and when you pull up on the parking brake, you're actually pulling, this cable is pulling and twisting the detent on this caliper, which is essentially pushing the piston into the rotor. So I have an issue where, like I said, it's rolling on steep inclines around the hills and I'm not getting a full lock with my parking brake. Now, I know it's not the cables, and that's why I decided to inspect it, but I want to show you guys how to check this yourself. It's not super difficult. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hop in the car and I'm going to pull the e-brake. I want you guys to watch this mechanism right here. You're going to see it get tugged down. Okay, so you guys just got to witness what happens when you pull the parking brake. Our parking brake mechanism was sitting here, our lever, and when we pull the parking brake, the cable pulls it down to this point right here. Now, an easy way to identify that is because the bracket that physically rotates on the caliper is now nearly touching the bracket holder for the cable. Now there are different styles as far as how these are configured, the mounting at least. But what I'm trying to show you guys is this lever comes down via pulling on the cable, which is pulling on the handle inside the car. Now, I'm going to show you guys, and it might be difficult to see, I can still spin the rotor. Okay? So obviously, when I pull the parking brake, we're not locking this wheel, which is an issue. Hence why I'm probably rolling on inclines. Because even though the mechanism is moving and rotating downward, it's not physically locking the caliper. So now with that being said, some people might think, oh well, maybe this nut isn't tight, or maybe it's something on the caliper itself. Well, I loosened this nut because I was going to take it apart, but instead I thought I would demonstrate a video for you guys. This nut has nothing to do with it, because this is actually splined all the way around this bolt. So this lever can't move without the bolt moving. So the tension on the nut is completely irrelevant. Now I'm going to go back into the car and I'm going to release the parking brake. Now what we should see is the parking brake spring back this way, because that's what this spring here is for. It is to pull the mechanism the other way to release the brake caliper. So I'm going to release the brakes and take a look. Alright, the parking brake has been released. It is back in the resting position. Now, as you guys can see, the mechanism did not spring backwards. Okay? Now, obviously, we know we have a problem. Can still spin the rotor as we should, the parking brake is off, but the problem is that this didn't actually release. Now if we get a pry bar or something that we can use leverage on, at that point, due to the fact that there's no more tension on the cable, a good way to check your cables is if you have a feeling your cable is binding, you shouldn't be able to pull it back. Now I can pull this cable out even further. So I know the cable itself is not binding. It's the mechanism that is failing to contract the other way. Now, yes, there are different ways you could go about this, okay? There are guys that rebuild calipers. I realize I can't get the internal parts of this caliper, which is why I did not take it apart. But due to the fact that this mechanism, the parking brake mechanism, is bad, that implements the replacement of the entire caliper, which is unfortunate, but that is the way most of these vehicles on the road today are. If a component that is part of a bigger component fails, oftentimes we have to replace the whole thing. So this caliper is going to need to be replaced. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you over to the other side and I'm going to show you a good working parking brake assembly. Okay guys, we are now on the passenger side caliper. We are looking at the parking brake mechanism, which I have already tested and found to be working correctly. Now I'm going to go into the car and I'm going to pull the parking brake into its brake position, and I want you guys to watch this mechanism. Once I pull the parking brake and set it, within a couple moments I'm going to release the parking brake, and I want you to watch this mechanism come back on its own power because it is a healthy caliper. Alright, the parking brake has been set. The lever is pulled into a downward position, which is engaging the brake assembly. Now, just to kind of show you guys, I can try to move this rotor as hard as possible. I can't move the rotor. This brake assembly, the parking brake assembly, is working correctly. Now I just released the parking brake. As you guys just saw, the lever came back on its own power, meaning the spring is sufficient to rotate the lever back into its resting position. Now what I've already tried on this side, guys, and I'll set you up over here, one thing I actually already tried was to shorten the spring. Now, I had a very strong feeling that would not change the operation of the parking brake, because what happens is the actual components inside the parking brake housing are stuck and they're no longer working. So, as you guys can see, I just pulled the parking brake. This is still sitting in the engaged position. Again, I can spin the rotor, meaning that it is not working. The reason I wanted to show you guys this stuff is this is very simple stuff that you can check with some jack stands in your driveway. You can hop under the car, take a look at the calipers behind the wheel. Always do it in a safe manner. But if you run into a position where you release the parking brake or the parking brake is not on and you come around to the back of your car, and this is sitting in its engaged position and you can pull it right back, well, that is a good indicator that the parking brake assembly portion of the caliper is bad. See how much more travel I can get out of it? So, I hope this video helps you guys at home to diagnose parking brake issues and failures. Again, it is unfortunate that we have to replace the entire caliper, but replacing the caliper is significantly easier than replacing the parking brake cable assemblies. Most of those jobs on vehicles are not very fun jobs. They include disassembly on the inside of the vehicle as well as disassembly underneath the vehicle, and they're never easy to get out. Alright guys, I hope that helps.